Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. It is a great pleasure today to be joined once again by former Ambassador Yoram Ettinger. Yoram, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, my privilege.
You have a unique understanding and insight about what's happening in Israel because of all your years that you served in the US and your continued work on Capitol Hill, meeting with influential and policymakers in the US. And it would be great if you can share with our viewers why Israel is a strategic ally of the US in a way that European and Arab countries are not.
Okay, well, we can take two relatively recent events to document the unique status of Israel as an ally of the US. First, obviously, the uh, 12 days war against Iran, uh, June 13 through June 24th, 21st. And during that war, Israel uh, obliterated the Air Force capabilities of Iran and destroyed its ground-to-air missile capabilities, tracking, intercepting capabilities, and in fact, such a proactive Israeli military offensive paved the road for a very, very secure US bombing of Iran on June 24th. US bombed Iran with no effective Iranian opposition, no air force and no ground to air capabilities due to the Israeli action. You go back a few years, 2017, and an Israeli intelligence unit um, penetrated, infiltrated an Al Qaeda bomb making cell in Syria, realizing that they are working on a very special scheme to plant explosives in laptops. And that information was shared with the US, which prevented or spared the US homeland security nightmare because that particular capability was able to evade existing Air Force screening devices and Israeli intelligence capabilities uh, produced a much enhanced Air Force airport security. Such two proactive operations conducted by Israel could not have been carried by any other ally of the US, not the Europeans and not the Arabs. They would not carry out such operations. They could not carry out such operations, and that's basically an example of the proactive nature, very effective nature of Israel as an ally. We are talking about uh, many other examples preceding those two recent actions or operations by Israel. We can go back to the 2007 Israeli destruction of the Syrian nuclear facilities, nuclear reactor, which spared the region, spared the world, a nuclearized Syrian civil war with ramifications not only throughout the Middle East, but throughout the globe. One can also talk about the 1981 Israeli destruction of the Iraqi nuclear reactor, by the way, in defiance of US pressure. And that Israeli operation not only snatched every single pro-American Arab ally from the jaws of then Saddam Hussein of Iraq, but it also spared the US in 1991 a nuclear confrontation with Iraq. How many thousands of lives were spared by that Israeli proactive operation, and how many trillions of dollars were spared by such an operation. We're talking about 1982 1982 operation by Israel against 20 Soviet ground-to-air batteries, which were perceived by the US to be impossible to penetrate. Israel devised a way to penetrate and destroy each one of them. In the process, we downed some 80 Soviet MiG planes flown by the Syrians. The information, the intelligence about that operation was shared with the US Air Force, and until today, that 1982 June operation has been a cardinal element in training American combat pilots and in shaping American combat tactics. We're talking about 1970 with Syria, at that time pro-Soviet Syria, Soviet-controlled Syria, invading Jordan, aiming to topple the Hashemite regimes and then proceed all the way to a domino scenario into the Arabian Peninsula, bringing down every single oil-producing Arab regime there. And at that time, the US was bogged down in Southeast Asia. The US could not avail its forces to help to snatch Jordan from the jaws of pro-Soviet Syria. It was Israel which deployed its forces to the Golan Heights, forcing the Syrian to roll back its invasion within 24 to 48 hours, thus sparing the US a major economic and national setback. Let's remember 1970, the US was dependent largely on the importation of Persian Gulf oil, which could have fallen into anti-American hands. And certainly 1967, a proactive Israeli 6 days war. Preceding the war, the Soviets basically attempted to catapult Egypt into the leadership position of the Arab world, in the process toppling again every single pro-American Arab regime. The Israeli victory obliterated Egyptian military capabilities, and that prevented or denied the Soviets a national security bonanza and spared the US once again a major economic setback and a major national security setback. We're talking about those capabilities that are performed by Israel and have not. The fact is that they have not been performed by Europe. People are talking about the $3.8 billion, which is misperceived as foreign aid to Israel. In fact, it's an American investment in Israel. But let's remember, Israel is indeed a beneficiary of a $3.8 billion investment at a time when the US invests annually $36 billion in its military bases in Europe, which also includes 80,000 American soldiers. Israel does not want, Israel does not need US military bases on its soil. And certainly, Israel has proven itself being able to surge as of 1967 from being basically a security consumer until 67 to becoming a security producer for the US since 1967, from a war-inducing ally of America to a war-deterring ally of America, and that all that without any American military bases, American soldiers, which are throughout NATO countries, as well as, by the way, in Japan and South Korea. While there are U.S. military bases in in Europe, in Israel, we have so to speak, 250 bases of top US high-tech giants, which have established in Israel some 250 research and development centers. And those research and development centers have enhanced the US technological edge in the world, have made it possible for US high-tech giants to expand their employment base, to increase their exports, to save dramatic amount of research and development. We are talking about the difference between Europe and Israel when it comes to the US. In Europe, it depends. Are we talking about right of center government or left of center government? Right of center government tend to focus on national interest and therefore usually welcome combined action, military action with the US. Left of center governments in Europe focus on multilateral cosmopolitan worldview and action, preferring to align themselves with the overall European Union policy, to align themselves with the basically anti-US, anti-Western UN, anti-US, anti-Western international organizations. European countries' cooperation, military cooperation with the US depends largely on European public opinion, in addition to the ideology of the ruling coalition. In Israel, on the other hand, whether it's left or right coalition, whether it's religious or secular, major power brokers, we're talking about a huge majority in Israel, which is an unconditional ally of the United States. And that has been the case since 1948, when contemporary Jewish state was re-established in the land of Israel, while Europe more and more lends credence to what one can hear from an increasing number of American generals who refer to NATO not as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but rather as no action talk only. It's a pretty sad and even sarcastic nature of Europe, because this is the same Europe which is very anxious when they witness the US intent to gradually minimize their military presence in Europe. And the Europeans are aware that it's the US military power which minimizes instability, in the European sphere and globally speaking as well. Europe is not a proactive ally of the US, very, very different from Israel. When it comes to Arab countries, there is a remarkable difference between Arab countries and Israeli alliance with the US. Arab alliance with the US is a derivative of 1400-year-old features of the Middle East. And one of those features has been the shifty nature of the region as a whole, shifty nature of individual Arab Muslim countries. And when you talk about shifting nature, tenuous nature of regime, a derivative is also tenuous nature of policies, tenuous nature of accords, and tenuous natures of alliances. And again, there are many, many examples. Few of them one can refer to Iran. We are very focused on Iran today. Back in 1951, new prime minister came to power, very anti-American, very pro-Soviet, very anti-British. And that constituted a major threat, especially to Britain as far as supply of oil. And as a result, in 1953, there was a regime change in Iran orchestrated by Britain and the US. For just a note for anyone who has any doubt that regime change is possible in Iran, and regime change can take place only with external involvement, external assistance. However, as we know, in 1979, there was another change, this time tragically facilitated by a US president when the Shah of Iran, the American policeman of the Gulf, was stabbed in the back by the US, facilitating the rise to power of Ayatollah Khomeini, transforming Iran into the epicenter of anti-US terrorism and anti-US drug trafficking. We can talk about Egypt, 1952, coup d'etat in Egypt, pro-US King Farouk was toppled, pro-Soviet regime ascended to power, and that pro-Soviet policy lasted until roughly 1977, when President Sadat became pro-US, and that lasted until 2011, when once again, facilitated by a US policy, that time President Obama, the Muslim Brotherhood, the anti-Western Muslim Brotherhood rose to power, bringing down pro-US President Mubarak. That lasted until 2013, when a pro-US General Sisi took over power in Egypt. And certainly Libya is one such case, highlighting the fact that alliances with Arab countries are traditionally pretty shifty. 1969, pro-US King Idris was toppled down, pro-US meaning he basically induced the US to establish a most powerful military base, naval base in Libya. Gaddafi took over, pro-Soviet Gaddafi, until 2013. He was pro-Soviet. He supported anti-US Islamic terrorism. But by 2003, he changed his tactics, his strategy, became anti-Islamic terrorism, transferred his nuclear infrastructure to the US. However, once again, the US stepped in 2011, initiating an anti-Gaddafi NATO-led military offensive, which brought down the anti-Islamic terrorism Gaddafi, facilitating the rise to power of anti-European, anti-American terrorists, and basically transforming Libya into anti-Western platform of Islamic terrorism, a platform of ongoing civil wars, ongoing until this very moment. And we're talking about Yemen. Yemen in 2014, pro-US regime was brought down by Houthi terrorists, pro-Iranian Houthi terrorists, and one can go on and on. But the bottom line is, it ain't over until it's over. This is the nature of the Middle East, and this is the nature of alliances with the US. Those alliances could last for a few years, for decades, but the nature of the Middle East, at least so far, has precluded a very, very secure alliance with the US, unlike Israel, where it's based on shared values, based on shared strategic interest, based on mutual threats, based on joint challenges, but literally based on the fact that the public at large, the political establishment in Israel has been unconditional allies of the US, irrespective of left or right in Israel, irrespective of GOP or DEM in the US.
Yoram, there is a movement once again sweeping across the world to embrace a Palestinian state. If the US were to jump on board that train of Palestinian statehood, how would that impact the US Israel relationship? Meaning, for many decades, the US had a strong relationship with Israel and a strong relationship with Saudi Arabia, while Saudi Arabia and Israel were certainly not allies historically. So, is there an argument to be made that the U.S. can safely start embracing a Palestinian state and maintain that relationship with Israel?
Well, it's always a possibility. However, in the long run, we're talking about a move, the proposed Palestinian state, which would severely undermine American interests. Most Americans, friends of Israel, foes of Israel, approach the Palestinian state issue from the point of view, am I pro-Israeli or am I pro-Palestinian? Americans should approach it based on American interests. The fact is that a Palestinian state west of the river would doom or would sentence to death the pro-American Hashemite regime in Jordan. There is a reason why the late King Hussein called the head of the Israeli Mossad in 1993 with the appearance of the Oslo Accord, which also included a very strong possibility of establishing a Palestinian state west of the river. And the message by the late King Hussein to the head of the Israeli Mossad was, why are you dooming my regime to death? Don't you realize that if you Israel, allow a Palestinian state to be established west of the river, this would be the end of the Hashemite regime east of the river. Anyone who is familiar with the demography of Jordan, anyone who is familiar with the very strong base of the Muslim Brotherhood terrorists in Jordan. Anyone who is familiar with the track record of Hashemite Palestinian military confrontations, anyone who is aware of the current Ayatollah involvement in Jordan trying to topple the Hashemite regime, anyone who is familiar with that reality would know that allowing for a Palestinian state west of the Jordan River would doom the Hashemites. This would transform Jordan into another platform of anti-American Islamic terrorism, which would trigger an avalanche southward into the Arabian Peninsula, as well as into the Sinai Peninsula, and from there to Egypt. Bonanza for enemies of the US, rivals of the US, and quite a setback to Western Europe in particular, as well as to the United States. That is the reason why the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Bahrainis and Jordan and Egypt and Morocco embrace such an idea only via talk. They have not taken into any effective, tangible work on behalf of a Palestinian state, going back all the way to 1948. No tangible Arab attempt, Arab move to establish a Palestinian state. And the reason has to do with the Palestinian intra-Arab track record. In the 1950s, the Palestinians terrorized Egypt and they had to run away to Syria. In Syria, they were allowed to terrorize Israel, but after a few years, just like it was in Egypt, they joined forces with the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria, and they had to run away from Syria to Jordan. They were allowed to terrorize Israel, but by 1970 they tried to topple the Hashemite regime, which triggered a civil war in September of 1970. They had to run away to Lebanon, which they plundered for 12 years until they were expelled from the leadership of the Palestinians was expelled back in 1982, and then they joined Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait, which was the most generous host of Palestinians, absorbing some 400,000 of them, allowing them to rise to top business and administrative position. And that was the reason for the leadership of Kuwait. Once they were restored to power by the Americans after the first Gulf War, the first thing that Sheikh Sabah of Kuwait did was expelling almost all 400,000 Palestinians from Kuwait. Arabs are also aware that historically, Palestinian leadership always sided with anti-Western radical global elements, Nazi Germany, the Soviet bloc, Ayatollah Khomeini, training Latin American, European, African, and Asian terror organization, very close collaboration with North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, and the conclusion by Arabs has been very, very logical. Why strive actively to bring about a Palestinian state, which would only add fuel to the fire? Sadly, the State Department, especially, and West Europe as a whole, have ignored the Arab lessons, and they do still espouse a Palestinian state. Palestinians are welcome in the US, in Western Europe, by red carpet reception. When it comes to the Arab world, at best, a shabby doormat type of reception. And it's time for the West to realize that a Palestinian state is not a solution, a Palestinian state, is a prescription for exacerbating the already existing instability in the Middle East.
Yoram Ettinger, always a great pleasure to speak with you, to learn from you. Thank you so much for joining this briefing. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning in. We will be back with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.